Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Hello there, welcome back.
So, just want to check real quick. Yep, we look okay there.
Yay.
We want to thank all our Patreons for their support because we couldn't do it without you guys. Also, those of you that are supporting us on Ko-Fi, which you could do, a monthly, basically, support, just like Patreon. And also, thank everybody before we get started for also your support over at Medicinal Foods.
Everywhere. We so appreciate it. Even a thumbs up. Nice comments in the comment section. All of your support matters and it counts, especially when we're not really allowed to say much and you guys tolerate our cryptic nature.
Yes. And we love tying things together because what we've been told from the guides, they like the way we're doing things as far as going over what's happening now, look at what happened in the past, and kind of get that bigger picture. So hopefully more and more people will have that aha moment.
Because we want that. We want a lot of people to free their souls. We want a lot of people to feel free to be themselves and go explore and enjoy their life. So this is how we're trying to help you.
Yes, because humanity does not have to conform.
No.
It doesn't have to allow itself to be assimilated into any sort of Borg.
No,
so to
not
speak.
any Borg.
No, one size does not fit all, whether it comes to, religious beliefs or anything. So, dare to be a unique human. Be yourself. Be yourself. That's the most beautiful thing you could really kind of say is, hey, just be yourself.
Well, everyone else is taken.
Mass sickness reported at Tucson hotel. There's not a lot of info on this at the moment. First responders are at the scene of a hotel in downtown Tucson after numerous people reported getting sick there late Monday, November 22nd. Tucson police and firefighters were at the scene of this Red Roof Inn, 1300 North Stone Avenue. An employee told a reporter at the scene that Pima County Health Department had closed the lobby, and the authorities say they don't know how many people have been hospitalized or what caused the mass sickness. The reason why I looked at this and thought, well, maybe it wasn't just, bad donuts out there on the bar or something like that, or bad coffee, is because there were people that reported seeing people in hazmat suits, and it had a kind of ominous vibe to it. And, Tucson, in case you don't know, is very close to the border, and there's been a lot of people coming over the border in recent times, but actually for a very long time, without proper documentation.
Right. They're just walking over and, we don't know what they may or may not have.
And so we got asked the guides about this. They said that this particular incident was under control, but that it was a sleepy cellular unit, perhaps being awakened, so to speak. And we do expect there will be more things like that coming because there are so many of them in the country right now. And when we could just look at, and you're going to see everything that we're covering here, it's pretty obvious what is trying to be manifest.
It's really true. They are going to try. We do have some extra time. They're going to keep squelching these little episodes here for a while, and that's for us to have more preparation, to be prepared for other things that are going to be coming at us, things that are necessary to change. Things have to change. We don't want to be stuck in this system for eternity. So things will look different, and it's just really good that we have a little more time right now.
Yes, and I don't know if we've gotten that point across well enough in the last couple of videos, but what we have gotten is that, we are having a bigger effect than you would think. And, all of us, with waking up everyone as much as we can. Again, think about it. If you hold back and you don't say something to somebody that's perhaps going to do something that, maybe not beneficial for their spiritual growth or their physical health, and you give them some facts, and then that one person, might get it from a second source, maybe even a third source saying the same thing, and then they think, I'm going to hold off. Or even, nah, I'm not going to do that. I guess I'm not going to do that. I'm not feeling so comfortable with this, whatever that is. And when you think about it, that person then may go on, each one of these people may go on to tell 5, and that 5 might go on to become, before you know it, several hundred, several thousand. And before you know it, things are being stopped in their tracks. And all of a sudden, timelines are shifting. And we could do this in so many different levels. So, we are basically having a huge effect on shifting the timeline, which is exactly what we need and want. Now, of course, as we were saying, that old biblical saying, right? You're the adversary, because that's what Satan means, is the adversary, it goes about like a roaring lion. And if you frustrate it at one point, okay, it can't break through the cage here, and it's hungry, it wants to devour, it's going to go around to the other side and try something different. And this is what we see. There's always these plan Bs and Cs that it already has planned out, because it's done this countless times. This is just one more cycle, and it's done it so many times that it already has all these other plans in place. So when we look at this, the Biden administration weighing sending military advisors and new weapons to Ukraine. As Russia builds up forces near the border, U.S. officials prepare allies for the possibility of another Russian invasion. And, again, whatever you believe, or, whatever is the reality behind this, again, there's strings attached to everybody that we see. And so, when they even got to go scratch their nose, there's somebody pulling the string.
Exactly.
If that nose scratch is of consequence, somebody is pulling it.
That's right.
And here you see U.S. patrol boats arrive in Ukraine to beef up the Ukrainian Navy. And many people, I see a lot of comments, people saying, why do we care? We're going through such, issues over here in the U.S., or, obviously a complete LOCK down over in Australia and places like New Zealand and UK, and why should we focus on this and potentially create a horrible conflagration that makes the scenario that we're in right now, which is a scenario that's obviously it's been more painful than anything in most people's memories, as very few people are left now that had lived through World War II, for instance. And certainly there's nobody left from the Justinian plagues besides maybe some of the controllers.
Yeah, that's true.
So here you see Russian military in annexed Crimea, trains to intercept cruise missiles. And we see Chair General Mark Miley spoke by phone with Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, exchanged perspectives and assessments of the evolving security environment in Eastern Europe.
So this is something that's really, really curious that we definitely want to keep an eye on.
It's part of that greater scenario. When we look at what is around there, and here you see a little map showing you Russian military buildup, 40 battalions, 94,000 troops, 1,200 tanks, 1,600 pieces of artillery, 330 aircraft, 240 helicopters, goes on and on. That's pretty encircled as far as the Ukraine. And, it is interesting. And people will always go and justify their position by going back into history, right? And you could, because you could say Kievan Rus. We could go back, centuries, many centuries to the Kievan Rus, where they were one people. But as we showed yesterday in the maps are always changing, always changing. So, you could say that Poland's justified, if you want to look at it that way, and basically taking over Ukraine, if you go back to one time frame. Mm-hmm. Or you might say, hey, Lithuania is justified in taking over Poland and the Ukraine because it was, the case back in 1200.
Everybody has a justification and a reason.
Yeah, I mean, And the reason why we're bringing it up, because you'll have many people that will support Israel too, no matter what happens. No matter what Israel does, they'll support them. Why? Because they follow the mainstream view of the Bible, and they think that Israel isn't justified because God gave Israel to those people, to the Israelites. And again, religion is one of the biggest tools of the powers that be. It's a controller tool. It's used to divide and keep us at war and to give us justifications for, why do we feel this way? Well, who am I to question God? How do you know that was God? When there's 3,000 edits in the oldest copy of the Gospel of John, 3,000 edits. How is that error-free?
Well, I always ask myself when I see that in any book, it's like, which God? You've got to ask yourself, which God? I mean, that's so evident at this point. There's just so many different ones.
Yes, and it's not just, Christianity. The Abrahamic tradition controls or has influenced at least 60% of the people on the planet directly, because 60% thereabouts are of the Abrahamic tradition. And so it influences the way we look at everything. And of course that includes Islam and Judaism as well. And here we see IMF Executive Board completes first review, and basically they're going to keep funding the Ukraine. Who is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund? Who is the World Bank? Who really is the UN? Who are all these alphabet soups? These controller soups. This is again, controlled by the monetary system, controlled by political ideology, controlled by religious beliefs. U.S. This is disconcerting. As you see another headline: Russian and American top generals speaking by phone. U.S. rehearsed dropping NUKEs, right? 20 kilometers from Russian border. What's that, like 12 miles? That's pretty damn close. Mm-hmm. If that is true, or is it just, another piece of this propaganda pie to create panic, fear, loosh? But then again, people might have thought that World War II wouldn't happen, and there was a blitzkrieg, and the cavalry of Poland stood no chance against the panzers of Nazi Germany. It did actually happen. So, there were millions of people that lost their lives. So to just dismiss all these things, I don't think we should dismiss these things. And again, we were talking about IMF, and we're talking about the money system. And this is just basically, here Tyler Durden over at Zero Hedge is showing this article that was originally published in Adventures in Capitalism. And again, this is another one of those dichotomies that they give us, right? If you say anything bad about capitalism, hush, you must be a communist, or you're a socialist creeping in on communism. Well, maybe there's better ways of doing things and not be a capitalist, not be a communist, not be a socialist, not be any of these ists. Maybe we could figure out something that doesn't include any of these systems, where it allows for certain elites to control everything.
This is just where we need to look, and we need to ask ourselves the hard questions. It's like, why does there always have to be an either or? And when there's an either or, why is it always this one or that one? These ones that they kind of take up the front of the train and they control everything. But we don't have to choose that. We can choose differently.
Yeah, if you think back, I was a kid in the Reagan times, and you think back to trickle-down economics. Don't worry. Take care of the elite; they'll take care of you. Oh, we see that happening, don't we?
Done well.
Okay, but I think this statement was key too. What if supply and demand no longer drive price discovery? When government has a printing press, these ancient laws become obsolete. Do not trap yourself in prior precedents. Economic history is being rewritten in real time. Oh yeah, and people are finally waking up to that. You know, when we first went to $1 trillion deficit, it was like, and now, you know, it's just unlimited. Why? Because they'll keep adding zeros. What digital currency? This is where we're going. You know, it won't be a free-based digital currency if the powers that be have their way. How about eliminating all that? How about just direct trade, direct exchange, energy for energy, goods and services? Just that simple. There's no middlemen. How would they survive if, you know, you went down to your local farmer and you brought him, you know, maybe you're somebody that works with metal or jewelry, and you went and traded? Where's the profit in that? Where's the control in that? There is none. That's why they don't want that. They want a system that they can control, manipulate, and make profit off of. So again, going back to this, we see that you have 10 U.S. Air Force strategic BOMBERSs trained to use the NUKSs against Russia this month, coming right up to the border. Now, when we look at those hypersonic missiles that are so much more advanced from the fine dining ware country and Rus, and the U.S. is behind right now, if it's making, if this is painting the picture that the U.S. is getting ready to strike. And by the way, the U.S. doesn't have, they haven't made the statement that they would not do a, you know, first strike option, which is curious. Well, you know, don't you think that the timing would be such that these two other countries, the fine dining ware and Rus, might take the opportunity to strike before the U.S. had the capability equal to theirs? And because they've been stressing so much how the U.S. is behind in this technology, or top generals have come out and said, we're shocked. We don't know how they're doing it. Their technology is defying scientific explanation. How did they get so advanced? Well, you know, don't you think that this would be the time that they would do something before the U.S. had similar technology? Now, the guides have said they won't allow what happened in the past, and we talked about in yesterday's video, according to the ancient Vedic and Pranic sources, like in the wars of the Ramayana that we're talking about, in the Mahabharata especially, perhaps 1.6, 1.7 billion people lost their lives in that particular war. And those were people that were actually waging the war, not necessarily civilians. How many people lived on the planet in those times if that was true? It boggles the mind. We don't know. Maybe this planet at one time had 10 times the amount of people it does now. And yet, you know, we know all the story about, obviously, carbon emissions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all painting a picture, painting a picture. So I found it interesting, and I found one article that was referring not to the use of NUKESs, but of chemical agents even being used, some sort of other type of weaponry being used in conjunction with those hypersonic missiles. And again, we saw treaties being evacuated by 45 as soon as he took office.
I think that's really also important to recognize and notice and point out, because that kind of can change the landscape. You know, what are these treaties? What are they doing? How do they function? I mean, that changes a lot.
When we saw that blast in Beirut, and many people thought it was like a bomb, a bunker buster, you know, something along those lines, or bigger, maybe bigger than a bunker buster, you know, some sort of very, very low yield NUKE. You know, so what if they were to try to fly under the radar of the G-Fed by using something so small a yield, but using many of them targeted at certain areas? Mm-hmm. And again, you know, as far as the countries themselves, they want the resources. And as we've said, perhaps even at the level of very high generals, they don't understand the big picture. They don't know that they're really under the influence of some non-humanoid beings. They really think that the enemy is simply the fine dining ware or Rus or somebody else. They might not understand the whole dynamics of the chessboard and the fact that, you know, the two hands moving all the pieces on both sides belong to the same body. They don't necessarily all understand it. Certainly the pawns don't. And again, as we've used that analogy, rooks, bishops might not either. So, you know, they're going to be completely on board with, of course, you know, everything that is being shown to us here. And yet again, now we have China scrambling warships and fighter jets as U.S. destroyer crosses the Taiwan Strait. And, you know, the Galactics, the guides, they've asserted, you know, this is definitely very, very high up there in the possibility. It will not be allowed to be what it was in the past. And some have said, well, then why did they allow that? And, you know, they're not infallible. That's the thing. As above, so below. Same thing with the beings. Even though they're higher vibrational beings, they maybe have had thousands of more incarnations, maybe tens of thousands, maybe millions. You know, maybe they've existed a lot longer than we have as an individual soul, so to speak. They're still not infallible. And they still can be caught off guard.
Yes, and they're still a piece of source, living an experience and learning. Just because the learning lessons are much longer for them doesn't mean they still don't make mistakes and miss things. You know, that's part of life is when you make an error, you correct it and you can make things better. Looking at these beings and understanding what Mike said, they're not infallible, that really helps you actually become closer to them.
Absolutely, because again, it's as above, so below. These beings, they have emotions, and you know, they use judgment just like we use judgment. And while maybe they're going to be much more on point with their judgment than we are, they still can make errors, even at the very highest levels. You know, they could have still slight misperceptions. This is part of this manifest universe that we see. It's a mixture. It's a mixture of all different energies. And even the dark side, you know, we shouldn't hold hatred towards them, because ultimately, if we look to say what the Sanatana Dharma says, and that's another word for what many people would call Hinduism, but you know, it also is a little bit larger, encompassing that everything we see in this whole multiverse at some point comes back to source. And then there's only the oneness of source. And then source starts all over again.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there are all these underlying things that are going on. And because there's this admixture of every different shade of gray, so to speak, we have the yin and the yang, the black and the white and the black. And we see the white and the black and the black and the white. We see the positive and the negative and the duality, and that each contains some of the other. It allows for there to be errors, you know, so to speak. It's all about learning, growing, exploring.
Experiencing and bringing those experiences back to source because source wants to explore. Um, you know, you got to think that exploring can't just include one thing. You know, exploring has to include the duality of things. So it is really a curious concept, but that's what I've come to the conclusion. It is difficult for me to say, like, when these really dark things do happen, things that are really, really bad, because of traumas in my own life, I have a problem channeling understanding in that. But I can channel the easy understanding is there's opposition to everything and source wants to explore itself. Ultimately, the light always kind of encompasses everything in the end. Everything goes back to the light of source.
And so we see the U.S. announces coordinated global oil release of up to 50 million barrels as expected. China, Japan, India, South Korea, and the White House all spoke about this. So, it's because the prices are going up. But what's interesting is why are the prices going up? Well, because the output during the lockdown, declined so much because there wasn't a need, because people weren't moving about. Again, the manufactured, the symphony, the highly coordinated symphony of destruction that we've seen, and this is part of the obvious nature of it. So a couple of different guides spoke clearly and spoke about the same situation. When they see the final, war that does end all the wars here on the planet, they know that the Kali Yuga is basically ending. And that's at the point that we're kind of at now. This is what always kind of has happened in the past. Now, we could change the direction of this, because it's all about getting those that are actually pointing the weapons at each other to take their fingers off the trigger. We have to reach people to that point, to where the ones that are actually, holding the weapons, let them go and say, whoa, what are we doing? No, hell no. And they say, I'm not going along with this. I refuse. There's a lot of people that have said that lately, even when it meant that they lost their career, potentially could lose, their home, everything that they own. They just find that they can't go along with something, and they say, no, I'm going to refuse to do this. And that's when that the end of the age is here. Mm-hmm. When it's a mass awakening, and that needs to happen. So Best Buy crashes as margins slide due to organized retail theft. This is going on, especially, we're seeing tons of cases of this in the San Francisco area, the Bay Area. You're seeing 25 to 50 people roll up to a business at one time and just ransack it. It's wild what we're seeing out there. And, of course, people are angry at the quote-unquote man, and people are taking out their anger and frustration in different ways. And what we need to do is to really work together in a constructive way. And don't allow the anger and the hatred to take you over. Recognize what's going on. And don't stand down against oppression. We do need to stand up for ourselves and all, but we don't want to be taken over by the same negative energies that have taken over the ones that have controlled this planet. We don't want to become the enemy.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important when you're trying to resolve something. You don't want to use the same methods that created the thing that needs to be resolved.
So Samsung is going to be building a massive $17 billion chip-making factory over in Texas. And the Republic of Texas. Oh, well, maybe the Republic will rise again, as we have talked about this. And, it's still, there's a lot of breaking down that has to happen before everything can be made anew. And we're not going to allow it to be made anew in the fashion that the controllers want. Mm-hmm. It ain't going to happen. They're going to try, but they are going to fail. And it's just a matter of time. And of course, like a spoiled child, they're going to try to make life as miserable for everybody else that they can.
They will. Just remember the playground bully.
Exactly. And we look over at Turkey, and you see the lira resumes free falling after central bank has no comment on today's historic crash. And we had talked about President Erdogan wanting to revive that Ottoman Empire. He actually sees himself as perhaps the leader of the unified Islamic world. And again, these separations by ideology, religion, and of course the monetary system, this is the cause of so much of the nonstop destructiveness upon this planet that's going on. And so why show this, over here, say in the US, or for people in Australia, UK? Well, because, again, there's always these wild cards out there that can do something. Now, when your country is going to start to fall apart, especially when you're somebody that's already done massive purges and a lot of people go missing, and they are already in a lot of other countries militarily, they could go and do something else that you might not have anticipated. And the Guardian view on UK citizenship, did you know uh, that there is a law that just went into effect? And every time I say that, it's scary, because we've run into problems with that before, where you're not allowed to talk about certain things that were put into LAW.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, citizens in the UK might find themselves no longer citizens now if certain rules come into effect. Now this hits me. So the Home Secretary can revoke British citizenship when it would be conducive to the public good. Boy, is that arbitrary. Conducive to the public good. I mean, you want to talk about being able to basically blank slate anything with that. That's this is exactly what we have seen in preludes to, say, WW2, and we saw many people from the land of the rising sun, as far as their nationalities and heritage. All of a sudden, they might have been American citizens, but the next thing you know, they found that they were having extended camping trips somewhere else.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And then that gets us thinking about, the land down under, and exactly what's happening over there as well with those extended camping trips. And, we have nothing against camping when it's voluntary.
Right.
So why was this ancient tusk 150 miles from land, 10,000 feet deep in the Pacific? And this article goes into the fact that at some point in time, there were mammoths that were roaming the California coast. And so, it's easy to take conjecture that there were massive, massive changes in the world. I mean, we've seen mammoths with their food still in their belly, frozen solid in places where they obviously flash froze. And I just wanted to include this because, yes, Earth changes do happen. Major Earth changes do happen. We know we're in magnetic pole excursion, at least. Could be a reversal. The last one was a long time ago. It's actually way overdue, according to science. That's a tricky word there, science. But what we have gotten is that people don't really have to fear this right now. The big issue right now is the geopolitical, the issue of human rights, the issue of supply chain, the issue of WAR. And, it's not really like imminent that, we are going to be flash frozen because, the poles are going to shift in the next handful of years. We don't see that happening. We don't see the guides have told us that's a long ways out. And, really the big thing to focus on right now is shedding the control grid that's upon humanity, surviving by becoming self-sufficient and starting to come together as different collectives, working in communities, working together, creating our own supply chain separate from the official supply chain, because by far this is what's going to affect many more people's lives than the potential for a pole shift off in the future.
Right. This time in your life is really important to go within, learn to heal yourself, work on your shadow self, work on the inner child, find your strength, find your power, know where you stand, and help other people to do the same thing so we can come together as a better collective, a stronger collective, and overcome this tyranny.
Exactly, and that's the right word. So here we see uniting local farmers with local buyers. What could be better? What could be better? And yeah, whatever that's going to look like, whether, in your group, you work out something where it's actually truly a barter and exchange, or whether there is some sort of monetary system, whether it's going back to actual silver coins or whatever it is. Just working it out so that there are no middlemen. Eliminating the middlemen is what eliminates all that control. Of course, in a totalitarian system, you could have no middlemen as well, but still have complete control. We need to develop the freedoms. And, I was saying to Cindy today, or is it yesterday, we were talking about how Gil Bates, remember Gil Bates? Yeah, you guys remember Gil Bates, how he bought up so much farmland. And where did he buy the most? It was, interestingly enough, he has the most acreage in Louisiana. Well, Louisiana last year was pounded by hurricanes. It has been pounded by hurricanes for a long time. If we are going to get colder on average, now the guides say that we are going to trend towards getting colder. But they also said that in our lifetime, we don't have to fear living in the middle of an ice age. It's not going to be that dramatic, that quick. But, do prepare for the tendency for it to get cooler over time. Again, it won't be necessarily, like the day after tomorrow. We have a tendency to remember these movies, which portray just massive destruction instantaneously, invoking great terror, when in reality, it is going to take some time for things to come about. But again, you got to prepare, you got to get yourself ready. And it was curious that this year, there was not much as far as the hurricanes. Now, at some point in time, as you get colder and colder, if there is no artificial flavoring, there's going to be less of those storms coming through. And eventually, too, you would actually have more ice locked up, and you're going to have more land exposed, as has happened. Florida in the peak of an ice age is, easily 2 to 3 times wider than it is right now. And we know all over the globe, we see cities that are, maybe a couple hundred feet away from what are current coastlines. Maybe they're even farther out, even miles away from coastlines, buried under what is now ocean and sea. Well, at one time, that was all above land. And of course, continents have subsided. There has been great catastrophes, like the sinking of Atlantis, so to speak, which was a global society anyway. Atlantis was a global society. But what we need to do is to get more hands-on with this. And it's amazing what we can produce on our own.
It is, on the little patches of land that people aren't using, those could be utilized. And I think when people start to realize that they're going to have to start doing these things, you're going to see that more and more and more. And it's kind of like the light that spreads. They have this dark cancer that's spreading through the land. Well, we have light. And when we touch someone else with our light, that light is spread. And we really need to focus on spreading our light. Even visualize that. Visualize yourself touching another person and watching them light up. This is really going to be helpful. It's a helpful tool.
So we see latest discoveries in the field of structural biology point to intelligent design. This is from Christian Scholars Review. And sometimes it's kind of boggled my mind that people can't see, because some people have been so indoctrinated into one particular ideology that when you say to them, no, I don't believe exactly what the Bible says about God at all. Oh, so you're an atheist? No. Yeah, I do believe there's a source. There's an ultimate God with the big G. Yeah, they can't get through their mind that you don't have to be a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or really anything, and still you can believe there is a source. And that's sad that people can't see that there's other ways of looking at things without all this indoctrination. And most definitely there's intelligent design, because as above, so below. And when we look at just the fractal nature of everything, we see fractals all throughout nature. And truly, we are living in the body of a being right now. And we're also living in the mind as well. This is how everything comes together and works together. We are single cells in Gaia. Gaia is a single cell in something much, much larger. The entire universe that we know of is but a single cell. And it goes on infinitely.
Yep.
Infinitely. And then when we look to the different densities, it's reflected along those lines as well. Fascinating stuff, really. And at some point, yes, books will be forthcoming. When the power goes out, that's when I start to write.
Well, I'm trying to talk him into starting now. Just do a little bit at night.
Yeah, there was, I think, was there 108 sessions of the Law of One? There was something like that, a little over 100 sessions in the Law of One. And it made me realize, because, the amount of material that we've channeled is probably 10 times that.
Yeah, we got a lot.
10 times
and
that.
I didn't realize until Mike was doing an interview with David, and he started rattling all this information off, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to start a book.
Well, because
this is lost.
The reality is, she hasn't, when she's actually channeling like that, she doesn't remember any of it when she's in full channel mode.
No idea.
She can contact guides. She could contact people's, past loved ones, that have moved on, things like that, consciously without going into a full channeling. But then when they come through channeled, she doesn't remember anything. So she'll remember things like when she's, contacting, like if I asked her right now to contact Laurel, she could contact Laurel.
Mm-hmm.
And get an answer to a question, but sometimes they come straight through, and Laurel again is our contact with the Galactic Federation, Pleiadian High Council, but sometimes they'll come straight through, and there's hundreds of hours that she isn't even aware of the conversations that I've had.
I didn't even know. Like, I remember when I talk to someone and I'm talking to their higher self, or I'm telling them who their angels are, or I'm telling them what their ancestral lineage is. I remember all that, but I didn't realize I had channeled that much information. So yes, prod him for a book, you guys. Help me.
Yeah, we've had some amazing sessions. The Justinian Plague was nothing like flu and may have struck England before it reached Constantinople. So this was a time of bubonic plague, and it was horrible. And, this occurred during the 6th to 8th centuries CE. And we know it happened, as they're talking about genetic discoveries, and obviously there's been a lot chronicled about this time. It's a fascinating time. Now, what's so fascinating about it? Well, one of the reasons why, because people thought this plague came from God, right? One reason people thought the plague had to come from God was the frequent appearance of unusual aerial phenomena in conjunction with outbreaks of the plague. One chronicler of Justinian's plague was the famous historian Gregory of Tours, who documented a number of unusual events from the plague years. Gregory reports that just before Justinian's plague invaded the Avignon region of France in 567 AD, 3 or 4 brilliant lights appeared around the sun, and the heavens appeared to be on fire. Boy, doesn't that sound like the vision, the famous vision over in Fatima and other places. Mm-hmm. Not just this. When we start putting these things together, again, so many things have been attributed to God, so to speak. They're actually acts of the controllers. They're acts of the controllers. They're not the acts of the creator of the universe. Now, there is the creator of the universe, but then another universe will have its creator. And this is something that we haven't shared too openly. Each universe in its entirety has its own set of creators. And it's just like, cells in a body, so to speak. And then there is the source of everything. The source of everything that is, could ever be, ever will be, ever was. And that is something that is beyond even the creator of this universe or of other universes.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know that's going to probably leave a lot of people with, little question marks and scratching
Well, but that's
head, but
okay because everyone creates their own surroundings. So just look at your own life. Look at who you influence. Look who influences you. And you have the power to control and create your immediate surroundings. And you just look at that and you kind of drive it up the ladder and it just gets bigger and bigger.
and so this plague claimed many, many lives, and there were all these sightings of strange things up in the sky. Another thing that's really curious is before, like we had mentioned before, all the blimps, the dirigibles, like the Goodyear blimp, the Zeppelins, things along those lines, actually came into production like a full generation before. There were many sightings of these things, and that's a fascinating thing. And it all gets me thinking biblical. When we go to Kings and Chronicles, we have the story of the census, King David, right? And so God, quote unquote, and again, when you get down to the translations, there's so many different ways. Every time you say, Lord or Adonai and all these things, it's too purposely, these things get jumbled together and you don't really know who you're talking about. Again, so many of these tales come from older Sumerian tales, but then again, when we're talking about David here in the census, and in one account, it's basically God saying to David, no matter what you do, don't number the people. Why wouldn't he want you numbering the people? Well, some of these battles, even in the Bible, talk of numbers of soldiers that seem too big. They don't seem to make sense with the amount of people that were supposed to be alive at that time. Would not the controllers want to erase, the exact number because people might figure out, hey, wait a minute. If we're thinking way back, in these times, if we're thinking 3,000 years ago, and there was only supposed to be so many people on Earth, like 100th the population now, 1,000th the population now, but there was actually battles taking place with this many people, that means maybe there was almost as many people as there are now.
Right. You got to think, how would they feed these massive amounts of people if they didn't have some industrialized thing going on?
In some way, and that gets to other points of being too, manna from heaven, so to speak. Right? It gets you questioning, why wouldn't God want the numbers of the people known? Again, if it's revisionist history, that kind of answers that question. So in one of the accounts, and again, this is from Kings and Chronicles, and everybody's free to go look into it themselves, it says that God decided, he wanted to punish David, so he puts it in David's mind to make it to do a census and to actually number the people because he wanted to punish them. And in the other account, it says Satan, the adversary, put the thought in David's mind. And so he does go ahead and does a census, counts the people. And then, God says, what did you do? And so God basically gives David choices. Okay, you're going to get punished, and, these are your choices. And he gives him the choices. And ultimately, what happens? Well, so the Lord sent a plague on Israel from that morning until the end of the time designated. 70,000 people of the tribe of Dan to Beersheba died. When the angel stretched out his hand to destroy Jerusalem, the Lord was grieved because of the calamity and said to the angel who was afflicting the people to stop, basically. But 70,000 people died because either Satan tricked David or, God decided he wanted to punish David. Well, definitively, this is not the source of all creation. Obviously not. What we're talking about, this is a controller being. And Yeshua even had confronted the Pharisees and the Sadducees and said, your God's not my God. You're serving the adversary. You're serving the dark ones. You're serving the ones that, basically control this system. So, i.e., we're talking about, the Gigi. We're talking about the secret societies. We're talking about the Anunnaki, the Draco, the AI dragon, the archons. These are the beings that are portraying themselves as God in the Old Testament here.
Right. And so when I read the Bible, I have to ask myself now I ask myself, well, which God? And that really helps open up a whole bunch more doors for more questions, which we should be doing.
Absolutely. So, it's so easy to see this when we look out to the Mahabharata and they talk about these gigantic battles going on with these ships destroying each other in the sky and using weapons that can only equate to the most powerful weapons that we know of today. It becomes really apparent. Again, when we talk about Atlantean times, that's what we're talking about. There was a lot of different extraterrestrial races that were coming and going all the time openly. When you look at Ezekiel's wheels and we look at things like the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart before the people as Moses is being led through the desert, how easy is it to see this, from an extraterrestrial, perspective? Again, we've been in 3D, right? So why did the gods disappear, so to speak? Why did everybody go behind the scenes? And when we're talking about that, again, we're not talking about truly the creator of the universe or the multiverse. We're not talking about the ultimate source, nor are we talking about the being that we might call the creator god of this particular universe. We're talking about extraterrestrials and interdimensionals. And why do we no longer see, when there was a time period where the Anunnaki gods were out in the open and people could see them? Because they're fourth density beings. And they will become more visible as we transverse back up the ladder. We went down the ladder like Jacob's ladder. We've gone down in consciousness. Remember Jacob's ladder, watching angels descending and ascending. Where? At pineal.
Pineal, right?
Pineal.
Pineal
Hello.
gland. And what is our pineal gland? It's our antenna that reaches out and gives us information.
Yes.
From other densities.
Ascending and descending, down through how many degrees are there in masonry that they're always talking about? 33.
Yep.
How many vertebrae in the human spine? 33. This is about consciousness. As we go back up and leave 3D, right now, the Ajiji are physically here. They are flesh and blood. And they're the ones that had that disagreement and weren't going to work the actual heavy duty work anymore for the Anunnaki and the Draco. And so, they became the elite ruling class, and their offspring here on Earth, they're physical beings. And then, physical beings right now with us, the Anunnaki at some point will be apparently very physical and 3D-ish to us as we step back into the fourth density. So, will we see the return of the Anunnaki? We could. We most definitely could, because they will once again, become apparently flesh and blood and of the same density as us. And there are beings that are interdimensional that can actually take over flesh and blood bodies, overshadow them, which we see all the time now with the glitches in the Matrix. They shall no longer be able to hold their form. We'll see their true form.
Yeah, if anyone saw the video yesterday.
Exactly.
It's a good one.
So this is what's going on. And so many people unknowingly are serving the dark side. And they're serving the dark side in more ways than one. And when we look over again to the Mahabharata and the other texts that talk about 400,000 humanoid species in our area, so to speak, all these different beings, the Vimanas, the flying ships in the sky and all. Again, when we go higher up and we actually get through to 5D, then we're around with these beautiful beings that are very, very benevolent, that are teaching us the ways of the universe. They're teaching us how to truly be. And there's legends from every people around the globe about these star beings that are truly benevolent. But there are also legends where they talk about the reptilian beings and the ones that are not so benevolent. Whether we're talking the Hopi or all these other tribe like the Zuni and the Navajo, and we lived on Navajo land and right next to the Zunis as well. And they all know of these beings. It's just right out there. It's just right out there. It's just an accepted thing. It's obvious. The only ones that don't know are the ones that have been brainwashed by the Abrahamic traditions, because, again, that's an extermination effort to exterminate knowledge, and unfortunately certain people as well. And then we go over to the Doggone tribe, and yeah, they know the same thing as well. Where do we come from? Out there. Yeah, star seeds, because, in the Great Lyran Wars, which brought what we would call Pleiadians to Pleiades in the first place, because ultimately the Pleiades got inhabited because of other wars that were going on. And humans, refugee humans, again, the first, beings have been dispersed all throughout this universe. And, life tends to look like life. There's that star, right? Why do we have the star? Why do we have the pentagram? Well, in one representation, it's the elements with, that one point at the top representing spirit descending down into the physical. Another way you could look at it, too, is this is the form of intelligent life, throughout the cosmos, typically. One head, usually. Two arms and two legs. But it may have bird-like characteristics. It could have feline. It could have canine. It could have all different sorts of characteristics.
Absolutely. It could be. You just, got to kind of be open to understanding that things are not always what you've been told since you've been sent to school. Things are far different. Just take a look at the science books. How many different science books have been rewritten since you graduated from high school? A lot.
Absolutely. So thank you guys for sticking with us through all this. There's so much knowledge and so much stuff to get across to you guys to piece these pieces of the pie, because as long as we're divided into thinking that there is a right dogma, then you're not going to be able to ascend up to the higher densities, because dogma divides, dogma lowers us.
And they use our ego to get us really involved in these dogmas and get us emotionally attached. It's almost like a emotional blackmail. If you step outside of this, then you must denounce everything you've ever learned. It's type of situation that we're in. So don't let that happen. If you're curious about things, go look them up. Go learn.
But again, too, recognize that so much has been changed, altered, wiped out. And if we refer back to 1984, what were they doing? That movie 1984. And if you haven't watched it, go watch it. It's free on Amazon. They're constantly rewriting history, constantly rewriting the reality of things
to benefit them.
It's a constant thing. It just never ends. This is what is going on. Why do we have metallic spheres 200 million years old in rock strata that we know is so ancient? Because there were advanced people on the planet 200 million years ago. Was it Homo sapiens sapiens? No, but it still could have been humanoid beings. Absolutely. So expand your knowledge. The most powerful thing is developing a spiritual practice that allows you to go within and to find out for yourself.
Please, yes, do that for yourself. It's a beautiful gift to give yourself, is freedom.
As always, guys, God bless and namaste.
Namaste.